All right, so we're going to hear from Bryce with Boa Safra real quick. And yeah, just you guys have kind of been hearing my voice all day. Most of you know me, but my name is Carolyn King. I'm the agronomist here with Continuum. So if you have any questions, just come find me, but we'll let Bryce take it away.
Perfect. Can you hear me? Is it good? Perfect. Good afternoon, everybody. I know we have slides coming up, and I'll start already to keep you guys on break schedule, but my name is Bryce Earlbeck. I grew up in western Iowa as a corn and soybean farmer, and I'm here representing Boa Safra. You see on the signs that we are a sponsor here today. And first of all, I just want to thank Mitchell and his team for putting this on. As an entrepreneur myself, I know it can be pretty difficult, and it's a long journey, and he's taken a leap of faith and trying to help the family farm. And so really glad to be able to sponsor this and be here today. So like we've... Go back one. So, oh, does it not go back? There you go. So as we've talked, a lot of people up here today, they've talked about that data, having that to be able to really validate what you guys are doing on the farm. And at Boa Safra, we are doing that in a different space. Not the same as Mitchell and his team, but a different space that I discovered about 2 years ago when I bought my first farm, western Iowa, and it's called Section 180. It's a tax code that we've been able to identify and build a process around. We'll go through this. Just my disclaimer, I'm not a CPA, not a tax accountant, I'm not a lawyer. We have them on our team to help farmers through this process, but we don't do taxes. We just put it together, put the data, put the process together and help the farmer through it. Get into it a little bit. Section 180, what is it? And I'll give it to you in farmers' terms. You can read that. That's our legal team's terms and our CPA's terms. But when you purchase a farm, many producers take the tile, the fence, the barns, the terraces as a tax deduction. Section 180 is in the tax code. You can Google it. You can look it up. But what it allows you to do in certain circumstances is to be able to take the fertility in that soil that you've built up and deduct the excess. And I'll show you a little bit. It can be a huge value to a producer as he purchases land, and this is a newly purchased land. And so I'm not going to get into a lot of detail here because I know we're on a timeline, but I can talk to everybody after this if they come up to us. So when you purchase a piece of land, you can take that excess fertility and deduct it like a piece of equipment or a tractor or a combine the same way. And just to give you a little bit more overview, we are now in 42 states. I know it doesn't show it over there, but we've done about 900 reports on about 400,000 plus acres. And if we go a little bit more, we'll go here. The average savings is about $1,500 an acre that we're seeing with the growers that we're working with. So that's $1,500 of deduction. Mitchell is talking about tax credits, and we are in the deduction. It's not a tax credit, it's a tax deduction. Back here, one more. So how do we do this? Just to give you a quick overview. So the first thing we do when we talk to all clients is we talk to their CPAs, we get everybody on board, the process, the tax code, what it means, what our process is, and we professionalize that system and process to make sure everybody is on board. And we've worked with over 900 CPAs now. We're batting about 900 for 902, so about 99% of working with CPAs. What we come do is we develop the protocols with lawyers, CPAs, and scientists on how to do this to be kosher with the Section 180. We come out, soil sample, we gather the data from the local region, fertility costs and all that, those types of things. And then we come back and we develop a report. That report has all the numbers in it. You hand it to your CPA, and he uses that for the deduction on your Schedule F. Just going back again, I'll make this short, but the average across all those states is about $1,500 an acre. And this has been around for about 50 plus years. And what we've done at Boa Safra is just professionalized this and brought it mainstream. So with that, I will turn it back over. If there's any questions, we'll be in the back here to the end. Just come up and we can talk through it. Thank you.
Cool. Let's give Bryce a round of applause.
Okay. Well, everyone, we've got one more session while we're here, and then we're going to head over to the farm after this. So wanted to, I think overall today, you know, we've been hearing a lot of kind of resounding messages, and I think Johnny's takeaway there was really crucial as well, that this still does boil down to successfully implement the soil health principles. That's what it boils down to, is understanding those principles of soil health, understanding how to systematically improve, work with Mother Nature, not against her. That's the key takeaway for sure. And we're going to hit on some of that here with our farmer panel. So we got the text in, so it's just like the panel this morning. So text in your questions. My team will get them over to me on the iPad. I'm kind of popping a lot here. My team will get them over to me on the iPad, and we'll try to get to as many of those questions as we can. I'm going to bring up our guests one by one, do a little one-on-one. Levi is my first guest. Come on up, Levi. And what we're going to do is go through some of these guys, kind of hitting on their stories, and then we'll have open Q&A with everybody else here as well. But help me welcome to the stage my first guest, Levi Lyle.
Hey, Mitch. Good to see you.
Levi, thank you for being here. So kind of the theme for this group panel stuff is, you know, and a lot of times in the last multiple years, we've done like only farmer stuff. Okay, so it's only been a farmer event. This year, we've kind of got a little bit more of like kind of the company and the supply chain side, plus we've got the farmer bit. And what we're going to see with the farmers that invited on here is we're trying to hit on a lot of differences within farms. And we don't have Amy Scotches-Cole here. She was going to be really helping us to hit on the broader scope within ag. Jimmy's going to hit on some of Amy's talking points. She wasn't able to join us here today. But Levi's got kind of the local side of things. Levi, your farm is, what, maybe 20 miles straight west of here. Tell us a little bit about you and about your family operation.
Well, I moved back to the area about a little over 10 years ago, and I've got a wife and 5 children, so we're kind of in the middle of the kids being in elementary school and balancing out everything we're doing on the farm with really what should be our priorities, and so that comes into play for sure. My dad and I farm together. Total, it's about 500 acres. I think in terms of percentages, so 60 acres of that 500 is organic certified, so for us that's a good balance. When I moved back to the area there just over a decade ago, we were renting quite a lot of ground, and you could see what was coming. Absentee landowners were getting ready to sell this high value ground, and they did. And so our operation has significantly shrunken because of the leased land that has now sold to the bigger farmers in the area. But we've used that opportunity to go more into some niche areas, and organic is one of those, which was an opportunity to dive right in with the cover cropping and really make use of that cover crop, because the necessity in organic that you bring along your soils. But now we're using cover crops, rye in this case, on all of our farm ground, and finding ways to even implement the tools we're using on the organic side into the conventional side, because we've been so impressed with how some of that has went. Yeah, because it's only 10% of the farm, whatever, being in that organic system, but in that you're still doing it with no-till and cover crops. So talk a little bit about the soil health practices that you guys have been doing in the conventional and in the organic. Well, in organic, the rules state that you have to have at least a 3-year rotation. 4 is even better in terms of the system goes. So the first challenge was like, okay, geez, what's that third crop going to be? And growing a small grain would be the natural fit in this area, because, well, now is more practical than ever before that rye could be sold as cover crop seed. And so that would be our third crop in that rotation. On the rest of the operation, conventional, it's still corn and beans, back and forth, but with organic, in addition to the extended rotation, using manure nutrients from the local hog confinement buildings, which you can use conventional manure on organic ground, so that's a big help in terms of getting the nitrogen out for that corn. But then in addition to the cover cropping, growing that rye as far as you can to get a big rye crop to roll crimp. And then you've got that weed suppression. When you roller crimp, and you can plant soybeans right into that.
So on all 500 acres, you guys 100% no-till and 100% like cover crop on all of that stuff, or do you have some that like it doesn't necessarily happen every year?
So now we're 100% on all that, and it's still a little bit of a mental challenge for me to put that cover crop out before corn.
Okay.
Because I'm of the school of thinking where on the organic system, you let that rye grow until June 1st, you've got a big rye crop to lay down.
Yeah.
And then you know you've got a neighbor that's a cattle farmer that's over there thinking, he is leaving all that rye in the field. What is wrong with this guy? And so that is kind of my own inferiority complex, because we're just grain farmers.
Yep.
But in an organic system, leaving that rye in the field is an incredible boost to the system, both in the carbon, but then being able to suppress the weeds by not using any herbicides on your organic crop has worked really well. And so on the conventional side, we've gotten really comfortable with also growing the rye out and roller crimping to plant our conventional soybeans. Those are Roundup ready soybeans, but we skip our pre-emergent pass with herbicides because it's easy to do if you have that rye.
The rye is your pre. Yeah, the rye is what's holding down the weeds and holding down those pathogens, stuff that could be out there.
So that's worked really well. And so what's been incredible is in 7 years on this organic 60 acres, we have seen a 1% increase in our soil organic matter.
Wow.
And scientifically, sometimes I feel like that's too ridiculous. Like that's not what we were taught growing up. You can't have that kind of a boost in soil organic matter in such a short period of time. But when you take the biomass of this rye over that time period, that's 20,000 pounds or 9 tons per acre that you're sequestering, and it's all out there now. It's gone from 2.9 to above 4%.
Building that soil up and getting out of that, 1% organic matter, those 9 tons, that it's more than 50% carbon, but you guys haven't been able to actually participate or utilize your carbon story to help meet anybody else's carbon story like we were talking about this morning, though, have you? Or what's been your experience within carbon?
Yeah, we haven't participated in any programs at this point. I'm just at that same stage a lot of people are at where I'm just confused by it all, and the idea of participating in a program that is going to insult me with what it is going to provide, it to me is a no-go. It's like, don't insult me with a couple bucks an acre or something. So it's interesting because as we started to hear more about the CI scores, I'm super excited about that, and I have this dialogue in my head that I just keep coming back to, that there's an irony that the best way to improve the CI score on our farm is probably to grow less corn less often by extending the rotation, by growing soybeans even multiple years in a row, because we can use the rye cover crop and roll it down.
Sure.
So I guess that's kind of a question. So
we'll have to find out.
How will that work?
But it's going to be year to year, so it'll be the CI of the corn, the CI of the soybeans will be separate. We're still yet to find out how it'll work in a multi-year rotation. But anyway, okay, I think we got things teed up here pretty well. Why don't I have Newt come up here? But let's thank Levi for being here. Levi, why don't you hop on our panel? We'll get back over to you in just a little bit. Help me welcome Newt and thank Levi.
All right, thanks.
Okay, so a lot of times here over the last multiple years, we've had just like on the grain side of things. My family farm is a grain operation as well, about 700 acres, similar size to Levi's. Our farms aren't that terrible far away from each other, but we know one of the principles of regenerative ag is also to integrate livestock. And this whole like panel and stuff here, and with Johnny talking, it's all about being able to find opportunity to make this stuff pay within our operations. Levi's been able to do it on the organic side, get some premiums there, and by lowering their inputs on their conventional stuff. Newt is doing it on the livestock side. And tell us about your operation up in north central Iowa, and let's just start there.
Yes, sir. So my wife and I run a 100% grass-fed beef business. We met in Washington 6 years ago. Before we got married, we started going to farmers markets, kind of started running with this thing. We asked my mom and dad if they had any interest, and Troy, my father, said, "Zero, do not involve me with the end consumer. You guys can buy my steers and you guys run with it." So what we did 6 and 6, grass-fed, corn-fed. The first year, it was abundantly clear that grass-fed was the market that we needed to be in. Through my wife's incredible hard work of marketing, and just recently she's been full-time April 1st, so give her a round of applause for that.
Good job.
So yeah, we went from 6 head to 12 to 24 to 36 to 48 to 60. This year we're doing 74. We use it in rotation, so we bought my great-grandfather's quarter section, 160 acres. We've converted all of that to pasture. We utilize cover crops, summer annuals, anywhere from 12 to 15 different varieties every year to try to make sure those animals are grazing something 12 months out of the year. It's a learning process. I would say just recently, in the last 2 years, I've been really happy with the quality of our beef. It's well marbled, it's good. If you guys are going to come out and eat this evening, you'll have one of the burgers. Yep. Please give us your feedback. But yeah, so my dad's always been doing that rotation, but we've kind of taken it to a little bit more intensively, rotationally grazing and using some different crops.
Yeah, and finding that consumer and finding that ability to market. But yeah, basically taking your wife coming back to be on the operation full time to market and figure out how to run all this and be able to make money off it. Trying to market 74 animals direct to consumer, or you guys have been able to diversify more beyond that. But also explain north central Iowa, like maybe help set up the stage. Levi's over in the Kyoto area, west side of Washington County. You guys explain where you're at up in northern Iowa, and then hit on like how you're marketing your beef.
Yeah, north central Iowa, we're in a glacier moraine area directly where we live, but the county as a whole has a great CSR, clay loam based soil types, really good really good crop productivity levels. So we're a little bit of the outliers. That was real. How
are you marketing? Where do these markets come from, and how have you been able to build to the level that you are today? And the point being, you guys have had to go from scratch, but you started small, and now you've built from there. How'd you do that?
Yes, sir. It's constantly changing. I mean, when you only have 6 animals, it's a lot easier to get rid of all that at farmer's market. But as we go from where we were in 2017 to where we are now, it's got to be diversified through social media, through farmers markets. A lot of it's just you being the one that goes to these. And I kind of asked my wife this question, and she said it's this in between where you're not a small, where it's easy to move your amount of product, but you're also not large where you have outside investment, that you can run these campaigns and you can put something on, sponsored. You type in our name and you see in Google and you see 3 other beef companies that pop up. So it's something that's constantly changing, and I think it comes back to really what Johnny said, in that how hard you want to work and how hard that you want to chase that dream. What you're asking from life is kind of what you're going to get from it. So it's just, how hard you want to go.
Let's talk a little bit on data and on telling you guys' story. And that's one of the ways we got connected. Obviously, you guys had found the grass-fed side of things, able to market off of that. And that's an angle that you can kind of take to connect with the consumer. But we got connected with you guys, too, on like the soil data side. And we did our Dirty Glove Awards, where we gave away basically a little shout out to the farmer who had the highest soil health score, the highest Haney score of the year, and the highest biological activity of the year. We've done the last 2 years, and you guys' operation was our first winner on the biological activity, I think is what it was. And it's like, well, it makes sense. They're doing all the soil health principles of no-till, with diversity, with the livestock integration, living roots all the time, and we got the numbers. But what are you seeing that the consumer wants to see when it comes to the story or data or being able to justify paying a premium?
Yeah, it's a story, Mitchell. You said it. I mean, I think it's a lot of what you're doing. I mean, there's other companies that they could use for soil health practices, but you have something that differentiates yourself, and I think it's the same thing for our beef. If there's something that somebody can come to our website or come to our table at a farmer's market or meet us and have a conversation and feel good about where their beef's coming from, knowing the story behind it, knowing why we're doing certain practices, why we're doing certain things. Yeah. I think it just encourages the whole story and makes them feel good about their purchasing decision.
Let's. I think we set the stage. Why don't I have Jimmy come up here, and we'll get into some more questions here later on. I got plenty more to hit on. Why don't we thank Newt for being here, and we'll welcome up Jimmy Emons to the stage.
Thank you, Mitchell.
So as we're going through like this event, we've had all these, multiple big name folks over multiple years. But one of the big names in the soil health movement that we haven't had is Mr. Jimmy Emmons. And Jimmy farms down in Oklahoma. Jimmy, you're wearing a variety of different hats here, and we got a lot of different stuff we could hit on. But let's start with Jimmy the rancher. Tell us about your ranch. Tell us about the farming practices you've been on. You're kind of the guy that's been at this for a while versus the rest of us young bucks over here, Jimmy, if you didn't catch on to what I was kind of working on here.
We've been at it a while. We started, I met Dave Brandt in 2010, and he really inspired me, and so I came home and started then. My wife Ginger and I and one hired hand, Carson Leibold, farm about almost 2,000 acres of farm ground in northwest Oklahoma. We have about 6,000 acres of range land. Run about 300 mother cows, and then we process and market a lot of that direct to consumers. Not all of it yet. That would be the goal. That's a slow step. So we've done regenerative practices ever since 2011. And then we implemented cattle back onto all the farm ground starting in 13.
Jimmy, we're super dry here.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Tell us about how this stuff works when every single farm we talk to, no matter where they're at, in Iowa, Oklahoma, the Dakotas, wherever, every single time it's all these principles, well, they don't work here. How were you able to overcome some of that? And tell us about that journey you've been on in building soils.
So since the beginning of me starting, and I also consult across the country like you do. So I have producers in the 6-inch rainfall, New Mexico and California, to producers like 60-inch rainfall we heard a while ago.
Yeah, like Johnny.
Yeah, and so I see it working everywhere. And that mentality it won't work is wrong. We see it all the time. It's all about living roots in the ground and plants. I was telling a couple this morning that said, it might not work here. And I said, well, you know why it always rains in the rainforest and it never rains in the desert? The only difference is plants in that water cycle. And you just got to think about it in that concept.
Yeah. Talk about, you've been able to see some major changes in your soils and now in your soil type. It's pretty amazing. Tell that story.
Yeah, the amazing side of that, and I feel real honored to say about this is, from the beginning, I had my state soil science NRCS working with me, Steve Allspaw. He's fixing to retire in July, which is sad. But all through that process, I've had at least 2 to 3 soil scientists on the farm working with me all the time. 2 years ago, we were doing a water infiltration test, big time. I have 2 sprinkler irrigation systems, is all I have. But we parked the pivot, turned it on, and we put 7 inches of water on in an hour and 40 minutes. Indigo Ag was there that day, and we had no standing water, no runoff water. And so NRCS wanted to see how fast that water was moving down, and we went down about 4.5 feet in a matter of about an hour and 10 minutes.
Wow.
And while we were digging there, Steve and Greg Scott, the retired soil scientist with NRCS, said, oh my God, look at this. And I said, yeah, it's moving down. We're taking a lot of water in. It's really cool. And Steve said, no, look at this soil. I wished I had the picture to show you. I do on my phone. But anyhow, he said, I think we can reclassify your soil today because you have changed it dramatically in the last 13 years. And what that really meant was my soil was classified as a eustafluventic, which was a very light soil, very low carbon content, about 500 years old. And they moved it to a haptosoil, molic, which we were actually 2 numbers over the darkness that we need to be for a molic soil. So we were very excited about that. I couldn't wait to call Dave.
Yeah. The only other farmer that I know of that's had that is Dave.
Yeah.
Sam.
Now, we talked about this earlier too today out in the hall. I think there's dozens and dozens of producers across the country that have done that. They're just local NRCS hasn't been on board to really look at that
to understand.
and accept that.
Okay, so a couple different things we want to hit on, and then we're going to get on our panel stuff. Real quick on your appointment to USDA. You've had a variety of hats. So we're talking the rancher hat. Hit real quick. Yep, swap the different hat. You just had an appointment with USDA here recently. Explain that one real quick. That's not the main point of today, but it's important for everyone to know for context.
So yeah, I had Bill Northey. A few of you guys may know
Bill's
Bill.
Here.
Bill came to my farm in 2018 after a huge wildfire we had. We're 430,000 acres. I had 26 miles of fence laying on the ground and major devastation. After that, he called me and asked me to be a part of USDA. Actually asked me to be put in for the chief NRCS. I did that, came in second. Thank God, I tell everybody. But then he also offered me the regional coordinator position, so I served under him and Sonny Perdue the remainder of that administration.
Your newest role is with Farm Journal, and we were planning on having another person on our panel here, Amy Scotches-Cole. She's the director of the Farm Journal Trust and Food Initiative,
President,
CEO,
yes.
President, Grand. She's in charge. We'll put it that way. She's in charge. Amy was the one that started the Fieldwork podcast as well, so we're bummed to not have her here today. So you got to wear another hat. Yep. That's Amy's here today, but talk a little bit on like the trust and food side of things, and what is Farm Journal Trust and Food seeing when it comes to all this sustainability stuff? So
Farm Journal created Trust and Food about 2 years ago to be the regenerative side of agriculture. They've been around for 146 years, very strong agriculture trust, but yet the need to see the curve to regenerative practices and climate smart practices. So Trust and Food came along. Since then, they've started Trust and Beef, which I manage now, an American Conservation Ag Movement, or ACAM, which is all about regenerative practices. And then they also submitted for a Climate Smart Commodity Grant, which is the reason Amy can't be here today. We're finalizing that submission. By the way, she texted me 3 times a minute ago, said you won't answer your call. So I'll have to do that when I get down. But so we got $40 million to put on the ground with 500 producers across 19 states here, starting in July.
Yeah.
So a lot going on. We try to be the middleman between corporate and farmers and ranchers, so we can bring them together, much like everybody else was talking earlier today on the scope emissions, how a food company is going to get reporting done with something that they don't control, they don't own. Yeah. And once again, how do we, on the farmer side, take that niche out of that, take a little bit of profit out of that. So we're trying to be in the middle to help assist that. So it's a big job.
And garnering those conversations and stuff too. And that's, I'd already mentioned the report before, one of the carbon reports that Farm Journal put out, where 93% of farmers are aware of like these existing carbon programs, and less than 3% of farmers have actually done them. Pretty big disconnect. So obviously we got to change. We're going to have to figure out a different route here. That's, what do you see, and maybe final takeaway, and we'll go to the panel on things that are shifting here recently.
I think we're getting ready to get into overdrive on that. The markets have been building, the plans to measure and how to measure, and y'all have been working on that as well, is now starting to come together. It takes a while to build a house. Yeah. It's easy to buy the land, but and easy to pour the foundation, but it's a long time to finish. And so we're starting to get there now. And I think it's now is when we really need to be focused as producers across America on getting the data in your possession, just like we were talking about earlier today, so that you know what you have so you can market. You all have done a great job knowing what kind of grain you have and marketing grain. Now you just apply that to carbon.
Yeah, good data. All right, guys, let's thank Jimmy for being here. Let's transition over to our panel. I'm sure there's questions coming in. Put your questions in. We're going to have some more conversation here. All right, guys. Lots to continue to unpack here. Oh yeah, we got a bunch of questions here already too. So, what this whole session here is titled, from the farm up. What is it going to influence global success? And maybe question for each one of you guys to tee it off. What do you think it's going to take to scale up the things you've been able to do on your own operations, but to be able to actually go and meet some of these corporate goals, or what's going to be needed to take this stuff and scale it up and Levi, we'll let you go first. What's
I'll
the
dive
answer?
right in.
What's the answer?
So we're hearing more about regionalized value chains, and that supply value chain seems complex at first, because it's like, okay, well, we're buying, how much P and K and urea from countries that we're shipping them in from hostile countries in some cases now. Like, how are we going to shift the way the United States is really using these inputs? Well, we look at our own communities, and every individual is different, but you can say, well, gosh, there's a guy right next door with cows or a confinement building, and I can use more of that manure and less of the synthetic inputs. And then we're hearing so much about biologicals from compost like Johnson Sioux and extracts off that. There's a lot of research that still needs to be done, but I've talked to several people today here that are doing trials on their farm with the biological extracts that is not fertilizer. These are living catalysts that help our soils function more efficiently. So if some of the guys up here today were talking about that, and if we can use less P and K and nitrogen because we have those living things we're putting in our soils, then that regional supply chain becomes local,
more sustainable,
because guys can make that on their own farm or get the ingredients, the wood chips and manure and straw and bedding or whatever they're putting into that compost, all local, and support their local community. It's like, that is that regional value, that regional supply chain. And so each of us can find little ways to do it right now.
Absolutely. Newt, what do you think? How do we keep going from here and scaling things up?
Yeah, I think it has to happen on an individual basis. I think the customer has to have a desire to care, to, look at the farms that they're driving up and down across the interstate and start asking those questions and start really having an interest in it. I think time will also be a big benefit of it. I mean, just exactly what you said, Levi, with incorporating more biologicals and manure and things that happened 60, 70 years ago, right? I mean, 160 acres usually had oats, alfalfa, corn, soybeans. I think getting back to more crop rotations, getting back to some more of the basics is a great start.
Jimmy, what do you think?
I think it's going to be a combination of everything these guys have just stated. I also think it's going to take revenue in incentives to get to the next level on a 20 or 30% or 40% adaptation across the country, because this all takes dollars to get set up. Whether if you're operating 2,000 or 3,000 acres or 1,000 acres of ground, building Johnson Sue's and all that is very efficient, but it takes time and labor and money to do all that. And so putting them practices on the ground, getting it started, take a little risk out of the first year or 2 or 3 to get someone in. These commodity smart grants are really going to help that, but it's just a limited number of farmers across the country. It's a big number, but when you put it in the whole scale, it's going to be really small. So we're going to get a lot of data out of that, but I think it's going to take a combination of little everything to get the banker awareness as well. I'm glad to see Rob Bank here this morning, because I think that's one thing that we're missing across America is bankers' understanding of regenerative ag and why they should be lending to that, and maybe not some of the other practices.
No, I think that's the financial side of all this. I think is huge. There's more dollars going into it, but we've got to. It's still not going to do all of it. We got to have dollars. We got to have supply chains like what you guys were talking about, and also got to have some of the technical support here as well. Plenty of questions coming in. Text in the questions that you got. Levi, a couple of different ones on some clarification type things on your farming operation and stuff. How are you managing C/N ratio in your no-till in the organics? Managing C/N ratio, both in the organic and the inorganic, and I'm sure, Jimmy, you've got an answer on your side too, but how do you manage that C/N ratio?
Well, I wish that when I started transitioning to organic 8 years ago, that I would have done more thorough soil sampling. We went off the local cooperatives soil testing. It's just PK and every other year that they would do. So I had that initial data. It wasn't until a year ago that I did a full Haney test on those organic, that 60 acres of organic, and man, if I could only fill in that data gap for what happened in that time period. All I know for sure is that I have way more carbon. Like that's because of what I had to start with in my data.
But what about the C-to-N ratio of the actual biomass itself that you're like crimping and stuff? And how do you avoid like carbon penalty and those kind of things?
Well, I don't know for sure like what my ratios are as far as you mean carbon
just
penalty?
rye? You're doing just rye ahead of corn?
Crop, you mean my crop hurting the yield because I have too much carbon out there?
Yeah.
I've seen that in soybeans it doesn't matter. Like so that's easy. But on the corn side we've used tillage, and so like when I was saying over here with you that growing less corn is sort of like what I need to do to increase my CI score. Well, that's because we're growing corn this year. You know, it's like we tilled it last fall, and then we had volunteer rye coming up. We tilled it in March, and we tilled it in April, and then we worked it 2 weeks ago before we planted the crop, and then we had to replant a little bit because of some seed corn maggots, and so we ran over it again before we replanted it, and then we rotary hoed it, and when I get home I got to get the rotary hoe back out. Like we have used so much energy this year in the corn year that in a way it just feels like Johnny was saying, it needs to hurt. Well, it is so painful to sit here knowing we've had no-till organic soybeans bring along our system, improve our what would be our CI score so much, and now this year it's just like
a bunch of tillage
out there, you know? It seems crazy.
But it could take multiple years to be able to get that to that point. And Jimmy, question on you on that of like managing that cover crop biomass, managing carbon to nitrogen ratio, and working in that more holistic system.
We really watch that ratio when we're putting our mixes together. We like to have that 25 to 1.
Okay.
But now if we're going into a sesame crop or a bean crop or something that's very low residue, we want to raise that carbon level high. So we'll go a little the other way. And then when we come out of that low carbon crop, then we know we got to reload. So it's a constant battling act in our rotation of the 14 different things we grow in a 4-year rotation circle. We have to balance that as we go, or we will have some penalties in there. And I think that's where some of that myth comes from, that you're going to see yield dings when you start into this. It's all about managing that carbon and nitrogen ratio.
Yeah, and that's what we saw in our first year with this too, that we threw out a bunch of cereal rye ahead of corn and planted it way too heavy. We didn't change the rest of our practices. We didn't get it killed the right way, and really dinged our corn. And at the farm here this afternoon, you're going to see some of that too, where we got corn into big cereal rye residue. That's part of our residue and all volunteer rye from our relay crop last year, and we've got no rain. So that corn that's in that big mat of biomass, it's hurting a little bit this year. Where in a normal, if we would have had rainfall, I would have been out of it, no problem, off and running to the races. But that cover hasn't been able to decompose now with no rain and no moisture to get those microbes going. So hurting the corn here this year, where we don't have the big residue, we're sitting great. But to your point on soybeans, we'll show here this afternoon too, in our relay crop soybeans, we're using that high carbon to nitrogen ratio. We're using that high carbon biomass to actually force the soybeans to work harder for us. And to your point, Jimmy, we've got to be able to manage in a more diverse rotation. So ahead of soybeans that are a legume with a really low carbon to nitrogen ratio, we plant that big high carbon to nitrogen ratio cereal rye ahead of it, and are able to really balance each other out and balance out that feed stuff that we're putting in there. And Newt, you guys are seeing that in your pasture system and moving cattle around and stuff, and that's my team put in the note, your CO2 score, your Haney CO2 burst was 454 part per million biological activity, a good score on what our averages are, usually around 100, 120. You guys were 450 some, and it is like just hammering on all those, just feeding the microbes what they need. They need that diversity. Tell us a little bit on what you're doing there.
Intensively rotationally grazing. We'll put anywhere from 50 to 70 head on 1 to 2 acres paddocks and rotate them. That varies on the time of year, like May and June. I don't do that too much just because the growth is coming so quick, but right about now is when, especially without that rain, we'll start trying to stockpile and put 50 to 70 head. That's about the size of our groups right now, depending on how many we've harvested, and we'll rotate them. So they'll go in with forage at 16 to 18 inches, and they'll just hammer it and cover it in manure. On these 2 home pastures, we haven't put any commercial fertilizer on those since 17 or 16 when we established them. The lime, we spread manure on one of them once. It's a 40 to split in 2 with our acreage out of it. So we've put manure on one of them once and manure on the other one twice, but besides rotationally grazing, that's the only nutrients it's had.
Levi and Jimmy, maybe you guys each speak to that too. There was a question in here on what have you seen from a nutrient management standpoint and being able to cut back on some of those input costs because you're building up your soil health.
Mm-hmm. Well, on the conventional side, I identify with what you were saying. It has been challenging because of the rye seems to have set back the corn, but we're early on enough in that. I guess I'm still going off what the research says, and the research says once we get that system going, then we're going to be able to cut back on P and K and the nitrogen. So we've cut back, and we are feeling it a little bit, and I'm going on faith now because the data is pretty clear that in time that system will get going. And where we've been no-till on the conventional side for going on 25 or more years, I feel like our soils are set up to make that transition. Yeah.
Jimmy, what are you seeing on your transition there and cutting back on nutrients?
So we've done a total nutrient inventory of our soil, very in-depth analysis, so we know the total pounds of phosphorus in every nutrient we need in there. So we've been able to go phosphorus-free the last 7 years. We still add a little in places where we need it, like you were talking about on that corn. But we do dissolve that urea into a liquid form. We'll also put humics with it, molasses with it, some compost tea. So we basically took about $190,000 out of the budget of inputs that we used to, and yet our yields are up just a little from where they were. So it's a balancing act, but it's also a rotational act. What crops you raise that can be beneficial to your next crop, and then the cover crop in between the cash crops. What nutrients are we going to need? Are we going to need nitrogen? Are we going to need phosphorus? Or we need micronutrients? And so trying to understand what you're planting that can feed the biology that will help you get them nutrients freed up for your next crops.
Yeah, it's my big takeaway in teaching farmers, like, okay, how do we implement all these things we've been practicing, that we've been talking about here? It's that cover crop especially, that's an offensive management tool. That's what you're just talking about. It's an offensive management tool to get me a direct benefit on my next year's crop. But it takes some management, it takes some data to be able to do that. We've been talking about data here, especially a lot this morning, on utilizing data to tell our story. How are you guys using data today? How does that tie into your businesses? Or where do you see data being able to play a role for everybody sitting here today? Levi, you want to go first on data?
So for me, when I talk about my story, so much of that has to do with that diversification of the farm. Where the farm for me is a little bit of aronia berries and now a U-pick tart cherry orchard, and involving the kids and all that, and then the organic side of what we're doing. So that story is part of what's important to me. Where data comes into play, I have really had a love-hate relationship with it for about 10 years now, because we've got the computer in the planter system, and we can see on the yield monitor how the crops are producing, but then you just set it all aside. Like these farms that I've been walking beans in since I was 10 years old, I know where the wet spots are. I know where the nutrients are deficient. So it's like I don't need a bunch of data to tell me this. And so that part of me that grew up before Roundup had been invented, walking those fields, feels like I already know all that. So where the CI score and what we spent our morning talking about is where the connection is finally being made for me. Like, oh, okay, so it is actually going to get farmers paid for what they're doing. So that makes sense to me. And so I'm coming to terms with it now and finally seeing meaning in the data.
Neil, what about you on data?
I think it's needed to ground-proof things. I mean, so this year I'm doing a 7-acre plot where I would like to see a 3-year rotation corn, beans, and then animal integration. So planted cereal rye last year after corn. We're going to graze that. 7 acres, 70 head, 5 days. We're going to put a 7-way cover crop species out there, let it grow for 45 days, and then graze it every 30 days through the end of October. And I'm going to pull some soil tests, and then I'm going to compare that to the corn plot on these 24 acres. And I'm hopeful to see that animal integration and the data that comes from where I graze cattle this year, instead of having a cash crop, off-puts what the additional inputs I'm going to need to have a plot where my soybeans were this year. So yeah, just being able to ground-proof that, and especially how that is going to affect, again, the CI score, overall soil health. And if you want to throw in the financial aspect of it, 9% interest, somebody doesn't have to take out a loan to use cash to put a crop in, and then they don't have to take a loan out for putting commercial fertilizer or use less herbicide.
Jim, what about data?
So I went data wild early on, and then I got data overload syndrome. and I had to rein myself in. And I think data is one of the greatest tools that we can have, but you also need to know what to do with it, how to do it, and how to manage it for the maximum efficiency to get out what you want. Piles of data doesn't do you any good unless you're going to use it. And so you've got to understand what you're testing for, what you're looking at, and what the focus and the goal is down the road for that data. Once you kind of figure that out, and I had to go through all that, then I could zero in where I exactly need to be, or where I think I need to be.
That's a really good point. And yeah, we've been definitely data overload for us, for sure. My agronomy team will tell you, we're in our 7th year now, I believe, of doing weekly Haney testing on our farm. We do zone tests on every single acre every year. Some of it gets tested twice a year on zones, plus then we, like I said, the weekly data on certain trial areas. And yeah, trying to understand, how do these things fluctuate? How do these parameters move? How do we utilize it? But to your point, now it's about reverse engineering. What's that goal? What's the outcome score that we need to be able to hit, whether it be a carbon intensity score, a certain nutrient type of score that we want to see, a soil health score, whatever that outcome may be. It's just about using data to reverse engineer that. And the question here on, what about using like PLFA tests? So Mike has a question. Anyone use PLFA, which is a phospholipid fatty acid test? We've done a little bit of it. Mostly Haney testing is what we've been talking about here. Jimmy mentioned a total nutrient digest. So the Haney test shows you what is currently plant available. That's the current assets in your soil. The total nutrient digest looks at what's the vault, what's the total nutrients that are in that soil. We did some of that on our farm this year for the first time. And we also did some of the biomakers assessment too. So a DNA analysis that Lance and the Region Ag Lab do. We've done a little bit of the PLFA test. It's basically looking at the groups of the microbes that are in your soil. Not as hardcore as the DNA analysis, not as basic as the CO2 burst that we get with the Haney test. It's a little bit more in the middle. Have you guys used any of that PLFA testing? Jimmy, have you done any?
Yeah, I've done that. And I also, that was in that time period, I was chasing numbers. And you got to watch with the PLFA. It'll give you a number, and then you try to chase a higher number. But you need to know what that first number means, where you're at in the system. And maybe that's a good number for you, where you're at. And so you've got to learn how to juggle that. We've done, especially on our compost tea extracts and our whole total mix, we've done the biomakers test to know that now we're 93% efficient on our nitrogen, which worldwide we're at 33%, 29%. So learning what you're putting out, getting that total understanding of the biology in there that for your benefit. So them are really good tools to use, but you got to understand the numbers.
How to interpret it, yeah.
Yep.
It's back to the agronomic support of what do I do with this now? And that's honestly why we haven't done a lot of PLFA or a lot of the DNA analysis. We're just trying to figure out the Haney test to start, and that's got a ton of stuff on it that we're trying to really figure out on the nutrient side of managing that test. Now, as we need, we can get into more and more data, but to your point, it just goes back to what's the question that you're trying to solve for, and that's always when we are approaching farms that are asking about using the Haney test or asking about using cover crops. It's, well, what's your goal? What do you actually want to learn from this? What do you actually want to do? That's where we've got to start. Either of you guys PLFAs? Have you experimented with it? No. Okay, question from Josh here. Especially talking about working with your financial provider, working with your bank. Some of these things you guys talk about, you've gone through some pretty major transitions. Organic takes multiple years to transition. Some of the pasture stuff, the journey you've been on, Jimmy, like this takes a lot of years of transition in some cases. And Josh especially asking about bankers that are pushing back that no, regen ag only works in certain areas, or like some of that kind of pushback. How do you communicate with them? And Levi, maybe start with you again. Have you had any of those conversations with the banker, or not really had to deal with it?
Well, my experience, I'm proud of, because when I began transitioning to organic, right before that, I went and became an organic inspector. So I did that. That was a steep learning curve, and provided more than just the confidence and from my father, which was very important. But so I made some money, and I got paid while I was learning. So again, that was me being able to go to the bank and feel confident with the management decisions I was about to make. But then some of the tools I was using, I bought a roller crimper, I built another one locally, began renting those out and doing custom work roller crimping for other farmers in the area. So regardless of the fact that I wasn't even fully organic yet, I was spending the money to transition. I was getting income from custom work. And then I bought a weed zapper implement from old school manufacturing, and I largely used that to do custom weed zapping, and I didn't want anyone else in the tractor running that dangerous implement, so I went and did it for local farmers. A weed zapper is an implement that uses high voltage electricity with a PTO generator on the back of the tractor, and then you have a copper bar in front of the tractor on the front mount, and you can weed zap the weeds in soybeans. So it's a soybean implement.
Killing them over the top of those beans.
Over the top. And so I got paid. I paid for that implement in a couple of years, and my banker liked that, the way that looked. And so that made it possible for me to do other things on my farm.
We contributed to that a little bit, but I rented your roller crimper on 2 acres that I tried. It worked amazing. We roller crimped cereal rye over the top of soybeans. The beans were about V2. We planted our soybeans into cereal rye in late April, and then around V2 we went out and we roller crimped over the top of those beans. Those beans made 70 bushel the acre. And like 70 bushel the acre beans, we roller crimped over the top. The issue for me within roller crimping was my covers are planted really thin because I'm usually chemically terminating them or harvesting them over the top. And we got to think in that holistic system to be able to crimp it and be more effective with that. But obviously a lot of guys getting it figured out here now, and a lot of crimping going on throughout Washington County.
Yeah, and you got to put a couple bushels on per acre to really get that biomass. And you could do a half a bushel an acre and still have biomass, but there's other elements that come into play. Did you get enough rain? Did you get it on early enough? All that. So lots of variables.
Newt, besides charming your banker yourself or sending your wife to actually help to have conversations there, how have you guys been able to work with the financial side for the transition that you've gone? Because you got a lot of money tied up in these cattle now.
Yes, sir. Yeah, it was a slow go. Originally, we started out with the USDA beginning farmer loan. That was an 18-month thing, and we keep these animals for 20 to 24 months. So honestly, it was mostly we both had daytime jobs, and we were just driving really old, crappy cars, and we just kind of tried to bootstrap it those first couple of years. We applied for some EQIP grants really early. We didn't get them, and just went for it. But it has gotten better. I mean, the USDA anyways has moved that loan operating from 18 to 24 months, so that's been a huge help for us.
all the different pieces. Jimmy, what about you? How's your banker feel?
So I was very blessed early on when we started having our first field days. I went in and Banker Frank's what I call him. He farms and ranches as well on the side. And I said, I want you to come to my field day. And he accused me of being there to get money for lunch. And I said, no, I'm not here for lunch today. You can do that if you want to. But I really want you to come see what we're doing so that you understand what I'm doing and applying. And so he came and he was just fascinated, and he's watched us over the years. And then when banking and lending started getting really tough, he started calling me and said, hey, I got a guy that won't cash flow. Can you assist him, help him cut back on nutrients and stuff? And so we've been working really well together over the last several years, helping other producers. And I think that's so important that your banker needs to understand your business, so that when you're asking him for a renewal of a line of credit or buying another piece of land or property, that he understands your capability and what you're doing. And I think a lot of associations are missing that. We tend to preach to the choir. And so we're really making a major push on several organizations I'm in to try to get the bankers more involved to understand that, so they won't push back where they don't need to.
It's been a huge thing that I've been pushing on. Obviously, Rabobank's been involved for multiple years. U.S. Bank is involved here as well. I think it's really important to have them. My local banker as well, or my banker that I've got my land stuff through, making sure that he knows what's going on. And we go and sit down and talk for a long time and make sure that he's educated and knows. And also, I think it's important for us to tell our story to that banker, that banker has influenced a lot of other farmers too. And then when they need help, they know where to.
And I think they really need to know what's in the soil, how much you've changed your soil from, like my instance, a few tenths of a percent to 3%, 4% in places. The value of nutrients and the value of future sales, if you wanted to turn that land or hand that on, so that's in the asset side of the balance.
So, and Taylor's got a question along these lines of, what do we think is the biggest barrier for farmers to make the change? And some of those biggest hurdles to overcome. How do we help farmers to overcome that hurdle and be able to get more folks kind of going this route? Jimmy, you're seeing this all over the place. At your farmer hat, the USDA, Farm Journal. How do we encourage more farmers to come?
Well, I think it's a mindset change. I have a lot of companies we talk to weekly, daily at Farm Journal and Trust and Food that say farmers and ranchers don't want to change. And I said, that's an outright lie. That's a myth. If farmers didn't want to change, not only would we not be walking behind a horse, we would still be using a stick to put a seed in the ground. Farmers have been changing since the beginning of agriculture. The problem with switching completely over of what you traditionally have done it that way can be as much as a family pressure. It could be peer pressure locally. It could be lending pressure. It could be alumni of a school that you graduated from. So it can be multiple factors. And about peer pressure is you have the deciding force to accept that or push back on that. I got to where I really don't care what my neighbors and friends think about the way I farm. They don't borrow the money. They don't buy the land. They don't operate it. I do. And so I know I can't control weather. I know I can't control markets. And I know I can't control my wife. So I can control how I run my business, and I can control how I accept or deny what my friends think. And I've had some really good friends that's land's been blowing and buried fences this year that now are really paying the consequences that wouldn't hardly talk to me before. Now they're starting to try to figure out how important cover is. So I think it's multiple faceted. The biggest problem is between them ears and the willing to learn and continue to change, just like we've always done. And treat a cover crop like a crop. Don't treat it as something I want to try and see if it works. That's the first question I ask somebody who wants me to consult or help them. I ask them, if you're going to plant a cover crop, are you going to try it and make it work, Or are you just going to try it and see if it works? And if they tell me they're going to try it and see if it works, I don't want to help them because I know that it's not going to work.
That's really interesting, and seeing now that there's a lot of adoption in this room in this part of the world. But my initial takeaway on why Washington County is Washington County, it's because the farmers here, when they started making the transition, said, we know that we've got to go this route, and we're going to make it work here. Exactly what you just said. Up in your neck of the woods, Des Moines Loeb, this is not common practice, but you're helping other farmers make the transition. What's some of the first barriers that they've got to overcome?
You said it. You got to put blinders on and not pay attention to what other people say about you. Yeah. It's unfortunate, but there's just a stigma around it, a general, I think, belief that if you're doing that, you're just a little crazy. We are very blessed to have incredibly good soils and organic matters, but at some point we're gonna have some issues. I think there's more and more people trying to do it. I'm also a Pioneer dealer, and I offer custom cover crop application, and it's usually when I tell somebody what I'm doing on that test plot or tell them what we've implemented on my parents' corn and soybean acres, I usually get some raised eyebrows, but that's the only way to really implement it, I think, is to have more people do it and show them that it can be successful.
Levi, none of your neighbors think you're crazy, do they?
I'm in the crazy part of the county. So what I see, along with what these guys are saying, is that each of us really needs to find that meaning in what we're doing, that why question, which Mitch, you started out your day giving a why. And one of the things I learned as an organic inspector going around hundreds of farms in southeast Iowa is that organic farmers often have a really impactful story. Somebody got lymphoma in their family, someone died of breast cancer, somebody's father passed away, and they related it to something environmentally that they were exposed to, and every situation is unique, but the premise is that was so deeply felt in their heart that they said, I'm going to make it different. Yeah. And so that kind of meaning making is what is really going to move people to make those changes. That's super interesting, and this whole thing I've been really focused on the why of what we're doing. I think that's right. It's not just about what we're doing and how we're doing it, but the why is really, really important. So we're going to wrap up. We're going to go over to the farm and stuff, but a final takeaway maybe for each of you guys on what do you want to see more of, or a final thought for the folks here. There's a question on like the universities and working with them that we haven't gotten to. Maybe what do you want to see more from them, but just overall with this stuff, what do you want to see more of? Jimmy?
Well, I want to see more course adaptation across the country of cover crops and no-till and regenerative ag. I really think that the big thing that I want people to understand is there's a better way to do it, and we can spend less money and be more profitable. For years and years and years, we've chased yield, and I love yield too, don't get me wrong, but my banker never asked me how many bushels I raised. He wants to know how many dollars I've got to make my loan and my payments. And I think we need to talk about ROI instead of yield. And I think they both can run in the same ballpark, but I think you need to focus on ROI instead of just yield. Because I've got some friends that will chase another 10 bushels of yield that cost 12 to get. And it just doesn't make good business sense. And so I don't have a problem with spending money if it'll make me money. And I just think that we need to really focus more and really grow and be more, environmentally thinking. And I'm not an environmentalist, don't get me wrong. But I also understand that we can do better. And to understand carbon and to understand it's another market that we can capture and add to that ROI.
Yeah. What do you want to see more of, Neil?
Coming back to what we talked about for somebody that wants to do more of this or get involved in it, we said we got to not pay attention to what our neighbors think. I think what I would like to see more of is the people that are in this room or the people that are implementing this to turn the cheek and after taking a slap say, still come over and check this out. Still be very open and loving and educational, because I don't think it's going to happen because there are so many people that are shaming the people that are doing some of these practices. Well, that just makes them think that we're crazier yet when we tell them like, oh, you're really bad for doing this. I mean, even if that is something that we're adamant against, and that's why we're all here, is because we want to make these cultural practices, these cultural changes, we still got to encourage these people that are the growers that are choosing to farm this way. I mean, it's not out of a direct reason for, wanting to do bad for the soil. It's just something that they haven't been educated on. So I guess, yeah, that's what I would like to see more of, is encouragement.
I like that. Levi?
Here's my take. The USDA can throw hundreds of millions of dollars at incentivization to use these practices, and they are. And some of that is necessary. We need more of that. But without developing the why, or what we've heard so much of today in some of the speakers, is that farm gate products that you're doing also new. Without that, then when the incentivization dries up, back we go to the old way of farming. And we can think it's going to be different than that, but I'm not sure it would be. And so we really need more of that farm gate. I think every individual has to kind of explore what that might mean for their farm, and knowing why you're doing it, so you can make these cultural changes that stick.
I like that. Well, guys, let's thank our panelists here for taking us home today. You guys can go on. Well, guys, that does things here for our event. Here at our indoor stuff. I know it was probably a little bit cold here, but better than being outside and sweating all day like we've done the last couple of years. We do have stuff over at the farm. The address is on your pamphlets and stuff. They might pop up a slide here. I think it was really good to kind of end with that farmer story and the remembering why we're doing this and trying to figure out what is that why. And Johnny really hit on that. I mean, that was obviously why he has been successful here, is his why is so strong. And I think that's what we're really hitting on here too. And the why that I shared of family farms need to be the ones that drive this, and that we need to be able to make things better for those future generations to come. We need to be able to continue to think very holistically and very long term, and but also at the same time knowing that we need everybody to come to the table. We can't create division by saying, hey, this is good, this is bad. No, like everybody, all of us here can continue to do better, can continue to learn, can continue to encourage other people, and being able to just continue to emulate that why and that push that we've got here towards thinking long term, thinking more holistic. But at the same time, I do think more farms are going to have to be coming to the table here, are going to be catching on, whether it be from our why or seeing what we're doing on our farms and them saying, hey, maybe there's a little something going on there, like Jimmy was talking with the neighbors that have all this dust blowing and stuff, and on his farm the dust's not blowing, or the water infiltration or the weed suppression, whatever. Those farmers are going to continue to come to us saying, hey, how do I do a little bit of that? We've got to be welcoming and open and honest with them too, and try to help out as much as we can. And more of them are going to come because the dollars are really going to be there. And there's more and more interest in this, more and more companies that are coming to the table, more and more of the financial sector that is saying, hey, we do need to figure out more of this. And I think all of us here, being able to just continue to drive that and be able to continue to work this path. What's amazing is it is the right path to be on. Like, this is absolutely where the world is going. The things you've heard today, what the speakers have said, this whole movement, like this, the writing is on the wall that we're going to have to do more and more of this. Excited to show you guys what we've got going on at our farm. I wish we had gotten some rain and have some better conditions to be able to show. We've got a soil pit over there. Newt mentioned we're really happy to have Grandview Beef to feed you all here tonight. We've got some drinks over there. We've got a musician that's going to be over there as well. We've got some established companies. We've got some startup companies. It's a little bit more of a free-for-all kind of thing. There's no hardcore schedule over there. It's just come and hang out and mix and mingle. See our sponsors one more time as you're leaving here. And we'll go over to the farm and hang out over there. As you get over to the farm, there's some parking kind of like along the road. Also just park in the grass. Hopefully there's a little bit of some structure and some system to it. But go over there, carpool from here if you can. It's going to be pretty tight over there at the farm. But definitely encourage you guys to come out, see what we got going on. The schedule for like the soil pits, it's going to be kind of open again. Like I said, there's no color on your name tag. There's no groups. It's go and learn and mix and mingle and talk to the folks that you want to talk with. The soil pit, though, they're going to do one at 4:15, at 4:45, and at 5:15. So just kind of, on the quarter past and quarter till the hour. We've got our state soil health specialist, Hillary Olson, is here. She's going to be leading the soil pit, as with our local soil health specialist, Jason Steele, is here as well. So definitely check that out. Again, see our sponsors, but let's thank especially Huma and Bo Safra for sponsoring, and all the rest of our sponsors. Let's give them one more round of applause here.